paper ready. That is actually probably my longest stuff. But it's big print. Alright, so let me set it up for you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the 11th Mississippi Monument, which is taking place right here. And if my calculations are correct, I believe it was put up after Maryland. I believe it went in that order. The state of Maryland's monument went up, and then the 11th Mississippi. This thing was put up in 2000, I believe, or 99 at the earliest. I forget, but I was here for that dedication. I have programs from it somewhere. Now, the 11th Mississippi is going to garner all this attention, and you should know by now that a bronze statue in the modern age, and probably not back then either, is not a cheap undertaking right there. So how did they get all this money? If you come around here and you look at the signs, which are right here, you can see that the regiment's companies are located, or listed, I should say, on this tablet, on this bronze tablet. The reason that this gets all the attention, the regiment I should say, is because of this company right here. This is Company A of the University Grays from Lafayette County under First Lieutenant Jonathan V. Moore. In other words, the University Grays are all students from Ole Miss. And they're all in this, obviously heralded or herded into this company. Now, I had an ancestor that didn't join the 11th Mississippi. He's not my direct ancestor. But we have letters. I have copies of letters from him from the late 1850s into 1861 from Ole Miss. And he is talking about, well, you think times change. He's right. There are letters to his father, and he is doing everything that you would expect a college kid to do. Writing his dad for money, all right? And he is like, he's at they didn't have dorms apparently, they have boarding houses, or at least this guy was staying at a boarding house, and he's trying to tell his father his great insight into how they did things. His father apparently sent him an allowance, and he couldn't stay within his means. But he would say, you know, I paid this much for board, room and board, which included his meals. At one time, he sent a letter home and said he had bought some cloth. And he named how much he paid per square foot, or yard, I should say, I guess, in cloth. And it was apparently a high price. I'm not an expert on clothing by any means. But he goes on to justify to his father why he paid this high price. But father, it is very fine cloth. I just want you to know right there. But the point I'm driving at is I have a letter from him from April of 1861, and it's like a week or two after Fort Sumter has been fired upon. And they have heard at Ole Miss, that Fort's called Ole Miss, they have heard at Ole Miss that Fort Sumter has occurred. They've heard about the firing, but news is traveling so slow that they haven't heard the result of Fort Sumter. So they just know it's underway, but that's all they know. He writes his father, and I've often thought of this. He compares Abraham Lincoln in the paragraph to the Queen of England. And he writes his father and he says, would we allow the Queen of England to come over here and dictate to us the terms of how we live? Or, you know, are we not free men and so forth? And he subsequently enlists, not in the 11th, I'll have to look that regiment up, but it wasn't in the 11th. And he is killed in the 7 days, one of the 7 days campaign battles outside of Richmond in 1862. The home where he came from still stands. It's the only antebellum home we have left in Houston, Mississippi. And legend has it, to tie it, if it could get any more of such a smaller word, his home reportedly is where, when Grierson's raid, if you don't know that, you'll have to look it up, but as part of the Vicksburg campaign, it's a Union cavalry raid through North Mississippi, through all of Mississippi. Reportedly, that house is where the butternut uniforms came from, where Grierson's Union soldiers changed into Confederate garb and rode out in front of the column. If that is true, which I have no documentation for, that was his house. But that is what the local legend is right there. The Butternut Gorillas, I believe, is what they nicknamed themselves. So you go down through here. If you look, you want to tie in with Matt and what a small world it is. Obviously, I went to Ole Miss. But you come down here, the Prairie Rifles were from my home county. All right, and the Prairie, we still call it Prairie. I don't even think it rates the post office. I'm pretty sure it doesn't right there. But Prairie, you can go out there today and see a sign. If you ever get there, have your picture taken. What does that say right there?
Chickasaw.
Chickasaw County. You go down here, and here it is, Chickasaw Guards. And that is where I rarely talk about myself, but the ancestors, I find it boring. But it's, so let's be bored. My great uncle, my grandfather's brother, whoever many greats that is, would have been in the Chickasaw Guards, and he here at Gettysburg was a third. You quoted me correctly. He was a third lieutenant. All right, you don't see those anymore, but basically, I guess you'd call him a lieutenant in training. But I think the Navy may have some kind of rank like that, similar to that, something similar. What is it called?
Ensign. Probably.
Ensign.
Yeah.
I looked it up. I wasn't looking it up, but I was going through. I don't know if it was Hardy's Tactics or something like that, but there's actually a place in those Napoleonic formations. There's a place picked out for a third lieutenant right here. Getting ahead of the call, I guess you're going to ask me what happened to him. He gets killed in this charge, and that's all I know. I don't have any record of him. I guess he's just cannon fodder is my best guess. All right, so let's talk about cannon fodder. So at 1:07 p.m., 2 signal guns fire from the Peach Orchard over here. That's from the Washington Artillery, which is a great book, I think, in Camp and Battle. That's one of the classics. You're going to put together a Civil War library, you got to have In Camp and Battle out there in your library. Anyway, those 2 signal guns fire, and that is the signal for 147 cannons. Cannon, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that did not attend Mississippi public education, cannon is both singular and plural. Thank you. Especially for the writers that might be in the crowd today. Maybe would like to take me to Alaska. If something tragic happened to their husband. Maybe a farm accident. Maybe a cow kicked him. Maybe a tractor ran over. Things happen. Good God.
That's the least of the abuse.
I don't know if you heard that. It was a solid lick, though, that was happening. The thing. 147 guns open up, and this is the objective of the Confederate bombardment. The bombardment is, at the very least, supposed to demolish, to destroy the Union artillery. Robert E. Lee is not sending, and James Longstreet are not sending this infantry across here, you know, just into the teeth of an attack. Or they will, but that's not the plan. Okay, the bombardment opens up, and I'm sure you can imagine it better than me, but I'll walk you back here so you could get a look at this rear echelon right here. You want to see the heart of the Army. Everybody that drives down this road, ladies and gentlemen, is looking that way because that's what they charge across. If you want to see where the Army was, it's here. That's where all the Confederates are, and we are so blessed as Americans to not have this view shed disturbed back here by a neighborhood. I mean, we are very lucky to still have that. And that's what your tax dollars bought. They bought an easement right there. So I hope you like that. So anyway, Davis's brigade is going to be somewhere in this area. If I had them, I wouldn't get them in the sun. So I would imagine they're laying somewhere in here in defilade. When the bombardment gets ready to open, they start yelling at the soldiers to lie down, lie down, lie down. And so Posey's Mississippians would be somewhere in here in this area. Mahone's Virginians, they would be up front the way I view it. If you look at the Batchelder maps, which are very crude. They're not 100% accurate, but they're very detailed, nevertheless. He should know. But they've got another Confederate infantry line in front of them. When those shells start to ricochet through here, one of them comes in, one account I have, I don't know if the lieutenant, I believe his name was Lieutenant Featherston. I guess he was standing. I have to assume, because this is the only way this would work. But a Union shell comes from back behind y'all, and it comes in here and it ricochets in front and catches him full in the chest. And his body, like a rag doll, flies up in the air. And this is right here, somewhere in this general area. You can imagine such force striking you like that. The soldiers start to hunker down. One Mississippian said that the concussion from those guns going off, that he was laying on the ground, and that when he would get toward the ground, that the leaves, there was such sustained concussion that the leaves were hovering in the air in front of his eyes as he laid on the ground. If you can imagine the ground rattling that much. I cannot do that. I just can't, you know. Shake your feelings loose, to say the least. I'll take that. I've never seen that, but I'll take that. All right, so these leaves are right here. All right, so that sets up this. The Confederates are bombarding the place. Now, I want to tell you a story right here. It'll take me a few minutes, but it's one of the best stories I ever read as far as the Battle of Gettysburg. And it's not weird, but the odd thing about this is right, the charge hasn't even stepped off. Hasn't even left. All right. This is, when the bombardment starts, apparently the doctors, the medical people from the 11th Mississippi and Davis's brigade are going to set up a field aid station. I didn't say major operations, a field aid station. They dress wounds, they do triage, they get people ready to go. They have pain medication back there, you know, they help them, you know, give them a spoonful of something, get them going. There was a barn, and I think, we don't own that land past the pasture, and I'd need to go ask permission. But there, I think, if I'm looking through the pasture correctly, that bank barn embankment is right beyond that fence line. Now, I may be wrong. It may be right over there in the woods, right there. But I think that barn I'm about to tell you about is right there along that fence line. Is my best guess. Right through here. All right, let's make a great shot right here. All right. This is the doctor writing that's in that barn. Early on the morning of July 3rd, I selected the nearest possible cover for wounded behind a raised roadway about 2 1/2 feet high, constructed to allow wagons to be driven in upon the lower floor of a barn and unloaded. It would help if you had the next page ready, right there. Fortunately, it ran parallel with the Federal batteries opposite and the crest of the ridge for about 30 yards. I went up to my little first aid hospital behind the barn road embankment, and under its cover seated myself for business. Presently the wounded began to come in crouchingly, for many were killed and wounded before the charge began. Most people don't know that. The first to arrive, borne on a litter, was a princely fellow and a favored son of the 11th Mississippi. I saw in an instant a condition of terrible shock. Keeping everybody close to the ground, I turned to him and he pointed to his left arm. I quickly exposed it, probably cut it off, and found that a cannonball had nearly torn it away between the elbow and the shoulder. I made some encouraging remark when he smiled and he said, quote, "Why, doctor, there is nothing. That is nothing. here is where I am really hurt. And he laid back the blanket. Anybody driving a white Chevy? And he laid back the blanket and exposed the lower abdomen, torn from left to right by a cannon shot, largely carrying away the bladder, much intestine, and a third of the right half of the pelvis. But in both wounds, so grinding and twisting the tissues that there were no hemorrhage. He's not bleeding out. That's crazy. I then surveyed his personality, observing the tender devotion on the part of his litter bearers, and I saw a singularly attractive creature. Through his deathly pallor, I could detect a sunburned blonde who in health would show a strong and ruddy countenance, a large head with a tousled shock of reddish golden locks, like a mane, with the muscularity and form of an athlete. Deferentially polite, there was something singularly self-confident and manly about him, answering distinctly the descriptive marks of that shepherd, the younger son of Jesse, about the time he chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook. Okay. If you don't know what that means, then you can now step forward and identify yourself as a heathen. Without the slightest change of voice, check this guy out. Without the slightest change of voice, he asked, "Doctor, how long have I to live?" I replied, "A very few hours." "Doctor, I am in great agony. Let me die easy, dear doctor. I would do the same for you." His soul peered from the depths of his blue eyes in an appeal of anguish that cut me to the heart. And I replied, "You dear noble fellow, I will see to it that you shall die easy." No word or detail of this scene is faded from my memory. There was no thought of the dramatic. It was dreadfully genuine and naturally spontaneous, in the unconscious creating and acting of a grander tragedy than we might ever hope to play. For my own feelings and as a physician, I could make no disclosure of his name and tell this reminiscence. I called for, and my hospital knapsack bearer, Jim Roll, quickly handed me a 2-ounce bottle of Black Drop, which is a concentrated solution of opium, much stronger than laudanum. Oh yeah. Some of y'all like to party. I poured a tablespoonful of it into a tin cup with a little water and offered it to him. But before his hand, I guess it'd be his left hand, but before his hand, no it wouldn't, it'd be his right hand, but before his hand could reach it, a thought flashed into my mind, and withdrawing the cup, I asked, "Have you no message to leave?" It startled him, and in a low moaning wail he cried, "My mother, oh my darling mother, how could I have forgotten you? Quick, I want to write." By that time, all who were crouching under the low shelter were crowded around, oblivious of their own injuries and weeping silently. I took my seat on the ground close beside him and lifted him over, reclining on my chest, his face close to mine, to steady his head, his right elbow in the hollow of my right hand to support and steady his arm. You get what he's doing? So this guy's leaning against him. And we slipped a pencil into his hand. Jim Roll had provided the sheet of paper held on the smooth lid of a hospital knapsack improvised as a desk. He wrote rapidly, and all of this transpired in haste. murmuring to himself the words audible to me, for I looked another way. He began with place and date. On the battlefield, July 3rd, 1863. He wrote little more than half a page, into which he poured with vehemence his whole soul of tenderest love, never faltering for a word, and a message toward the last, with a name that he wrote silently and conscious of the presence of strangers, semicolon. But the message was too personal and sacred to him for me to trespass, for it was holy ground. The last line he softly repeated aloud, I dip this letter in my dying blood. With that, he turned down the blanket and, seizing the letter, pressed the back of it upon his oozing, bloody wound and handed it to me, giving his mother's address and begging to be sure she got that letter. I arose from the ground and had him supported, when he turned to me with a reminder of my promise and of his hopeless pain. I handed him the cup, and he feebly waved it, saying, Come round, boys, and let us have a toast. I do not invite you to drink with me, but I drink the toast to you, and to the Southern Confederacy, and to victory. And he grabbed it to the last drop, returning the cup, saying, I thank you. We laid him back down on some improvised soft headrest, and I rushed off to work among the wounded. In about an hour, passing hastily, I lifted the cover from his face to find him sleeping painlessly. 3 hours later, as the tide of battle turned and the Southern Confederacy had touched its highest watermark and ebb tide began, I passed again and laid aside the cover from his face to find that the spirit of our reincarnated Sir Galahad had taken its flight in triumphal ascension to him who instituted and consecrated the Holy Grail. Oh, the excruciating pathos and very agony of the glory! Exclamation mark. His death surpassed in tenderness of love and philosophical resignation and courage and willing sacrifice of self, if it were possible, even that of Socrates. Now listen to this. Upon the receding wave of the great charge came a heavy drift of shattered humanity. I love that sentence. All right. The gentleman's name was Jeremiah Gage. And the surgeon that wrote this did not reveal his name in this article. But subsequently, to tie it in with what I just said about the 11th Mississippi and Ole Miss, he was part of Company A. And subsequently, at some point, the descendants, who were obviously still in Mississippi, donated that letter to Ole Miss. They did a few years ago. I haven't looked in a while. But if you look it up, Jeremiah Gage, University of Mississippi, they used to have a high, or still does, a high-resolution image of that letter online. Okay, and you can see the pencil shaking, or the hand shaking. Here it is. Gettysburg, July 3rd. My dear mother, this is the last you may ever hear from me. I have time to tell you that I died like a man. Bear my loss best you can. Remember that I am true to my country, and my greatest regret at dying is that she is not free, and that you and my sisters are robbed of my worth, whatever that may be. I hope this will reach you, and you must not regret that my body cannot be obtained. It is a mere matter of form anyhow. This is for my sisters too, as I cannot write more. Send my dying release to Miss Mary, ... you know who. J.S. Gage, Company A, 11th Mississippi. On the bottom he wrote, Mrs. P.W. Gage, Richland, Holmes County, Mississippi. And at the very bottom of it, if you look it up, he wrote, "This letter is stained with my blood." If you look up that, you can still see that dark image. That's what it is on that paper right there. Now the thing that grabs me is how many times, well, it's a good story first of all, but how many times was that story repeated? And nobody sat down to capture it like that. All right, we're going to, at this moment, we're going to step across the street. Okay?
I do have a question, though.
Yeah.
Just looking at the statue alone, was it common for them to cross-draw the sidearm?
I